Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Leslie Hassono, and with me here is our PQRN, Tammy Novacek. So we are representing our pediatric critical care team here at John Muir. So as clinicians and healthcare practitioners, many of us stood at the bedside asking, how long should we continue CPR on infants or children before we pronounce death? Evidence varies, and there's no absolute time limit. For us, outcomes are charted as survival or death. For families, however, every minute carries meanings that last a lifetime. So I want to share a passage from Jenny Kim's book, Look to the Sky. Dear John Muir Health PQ team, thank you for giving my family 8 more days with sweet baby Joe. Thank you for not giving up in the ED and getting his Ross back. The gift of time was a miracle. I want to say that passage for everyone. And then, it's actually, there's a book here. You can see that later on, then you can read it if you have a chance. It's a very good book. And then, so that message distills our calling. Even when cure isn't possible, what we offer, steady presence, compassion, and dignity can be transformative. Families carry those gifts forward, and their reflection reminds us that our efforts are never wasted. In recognizing the human impact of our work, we also guard against burnout. Purpose and gratitude become protective for us as clinicians. We are truly fortunate to have Jenny Kim with us today. She brings both professional expertise and the courageous perspective of a mother willing to share what care felt like on the receiving end. This goes beyond our usual hot and cold debriefs. It invites us to see what matters most in real time to the people we serve. Tammy, your turn.
Good morning. As Russ said, my name is Tammy. I'm a nurse here in the pediatric ICU, and I had the distinct honor and privilege of caring for baby Joey, and I'm further honored to be part of this special and important grand rounds this morning. As healthcare professionals, we meet people during their vulnerable circumstances. Our patients and families don't wake up in the morning planning to have their lives disrupted by a hospital stay. So our hope is to show up for them and help them get better so they can get back to what it was they were doing before they arrived. When we're not able to accomplish that goal, it can feel like failure. I think we can all recall times when we were sincerely thanked for our efforts. It's one of the most gracious thank yous one can ever receive. It may not feel deserved because you couldn't help in the way you intended, but that is how important our actions are in those most vulnerable times. When nothing medically can be done, all we are left with is being there for our fellow man, woman, and child. Our actions speak loudly at those times, and they will be remembered. Jenny knows both sides of this scenario. What she has done with that experience is beautiful, humbling, thoughtful, and profound. What she has to say will leave you moved and will also help give you renewed strength and energy to keep showing up for our little patients and their families. Thank you, Jenny, for all you are doing and for being here today.
So with appreciations of her generosity and bravery, please join us in welcoming Jenny Kim. Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, that was such a warm introduction. I hope I deliver on all that you say that I can do. So I'm going to do my best with this talk. First, do you see my slide here or do you see my notes? Just checking.
We see a slide.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
You see your slide, yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So good morning. Thank you, Department of Pediatrics, for having me today. I feel so honored to be invited here. And it's great to hear that from your side, this is maybe a rare opportunity to see what happens after. But for me, it's also just a full circle moment to have been a patient in your care 3 years ago and to be able to be back here today. And actually, October 7th, 2025 is today, and 3 years ago exactly to this date, on October 7th, 2022, that's when I had the courage, if you will, to share on social media that I lost my son. So really, it's 3 years, and I didn't think I was going to get emotional. I'm very grateful to be here with you today. So today's talk is called The Quiet Power of Presence, What Families Remember Most. So here are my disclosures. While I once worked in the acute care setting, I am now a pharmacist practicing in industry. I am also the founder of Grievers and Friends, which is a platform aimed to provide grief support to grievers and their friend community by offering customizable grief forward picture books. And our mission is to normalize grief conversations and to give back to the nonprofits that support child loss. Here are the objectives for today. By the end of this session, the goal would be to be able to better define and recognize provider grief, and then apply principles of grief literacy to improve compassionate communication, and then to integrate these strategies that validate and support the grievers around us. Here's the outline for today's session. It's a bit jam-packed. If I was given the opportunity to speak off the cuff about grief, I would probably do it for hours, so I'm going to try my best to stick to this outline. This session is centered around grief related to the loss of life. So from my own lived experience, I realize how limited grief education and compassionate communication is built into our training formally. And this is despite us being in healthcare, where there is high potential and we will likely witness so much grief, as you all are already aware of. So truly growing up in any environment of education, no one actually teaches you how to support someone who is grieving. And definitely no one teaches you what to do when you become the griever. So with that in mind, we'll start with Grief 101 to cover common terms, numbers, and just how it shows up for us at work in the healthcare setting. And then I'll share a piece of my broken heart, your patient case, my Joey story, and I'll speak to the quiet power of presence. And I'll share the outcome of your compassion and grace. And finally, we'll spend some time on grief support. And then because this session qualifies for CME and MLC credit, there will be 4 self-assessment questions at the end. And then we will close with a short video that illustrates from my perspective the outcome of quiet power of presence and the ripple effect of compassion. And as I move through these slides, please quietly reflect on your experiences with grief as a provider, as a friend or a family member, and just as a human being. So we're going to start. So what is grief? Clinically, grief is a multifaceted emotional and physical response to a significant loss. When referring to grief in the setting of loss of life, I've come to realize and know intimately that grief at its core is love with nowhere to go. Grief is complicated, it's messy, and it's different for everyone. And because of the complexity and depth, I want to start with some familiar and maybe not so familiar terms. So when looking at responses to grief, expression of sympathy at its best is able to let the griever know you are holding space for them in their grief. It acknowledges the pain without needing to fix it. Empathy goes deeper. It's to feel with someone. But sometimes in our effort to meet someone in their pain, we may fall into a trap of just trying to cheer them up instead of simply sitting with them in their pain and just letting everyone be. There's no fixing. So even with the best intentions, we may slip into things like toxic positivity, which is focusing on the bright side without acknowledging the pain. Or we may respond to something like everything happens for a reason, or time will heal all wounds. Well-meaning for sure, but the time and place just doesn't land the right way. And I loved quotes all of my life, and I never saw these phrases as platitudes or something that can land kind of weird or off until I became a griever myself. And not just a griever on the surface, but feeling a sense of deep, out of order grief. And I know before losing Joey, I've definitely fallen into the trap myself. And looking back, I do cringe a little bit. But hey, we are all human. Like the point here isn't perfection. We are all going to fumble. We are all learning as we go. The point here is just awareness. Awareness gives us the chance to pause, to notice, and to choose words or actions that lighten the weight instead of adding to it. And showing up imperfectly at the end of the day is better than not showing up at all. And just as responses to grief have layers of nuance, so do the different types of grief experiences themselves. I think for me, before knowing this experience, I just generalized grief as one thing, like grief, one thing, sad. But until it knocked on my door and invited themselves in, that's when I really took a look at what grief is all about. It's so complex. So we're going to intentionally walk through this slide together. It will give us awareness and a name to the types of grief that already shows up or will. Anticipatory grief is a grief that starts before the loss even happens. For example, when you care for a patient, you know isn't going to recover. And as providers, we often find ourselves grieving while still in the thick of showing up for care. And I'm certain that Joey's care team knew this after we achieved ROSC. Um, Complicated or prolonged grief is when grief just doesn't ease in the way society expects. It keeps someone from functioning. For providers, this might look like being unable to return to patient care after a traumatic loss or just switching careers altogether. Compounded or cumulative grief, if grief is grief that just piles on, multiple losses with no time to recover. I would imagine for providers, this showed up during the early days of COVID, where there wasn't a chance to breathe before the next wave hit, or even in life, just losing loved ones after loved ones in a short amount of time. Secondary trauma is more short term. It's the emotional impact of being around someone else's pain or trauma. For instance, sitting with grieving families all day and feeling emotionally flooded by the end of your shift. And I would imagine maybe a little bit of what I share later can induce a little bit of secondary trauma. Vicarious trauma, this was a new term to me when I was preparing for this presentation. It's different from secondary trauma. This is more of a long-term impact. This is when repeated exposure changes the way you see the world, like a provider who becomes more cynical or more fearful about life after years of tragic loss. For me, vicarious trauma from my peds critical care experience up as hypervigilance in motherhood. After a decade of code blues, ECMO codes, traumas, ICU rounding, order verification, and chart review, I saw a lot, and it was heavy. And I didn't know. It showed up later when I had to take care of children for myself. Disenfranchised grief is grief that isn't commonly acknowledged or validated by others. Think about a provider grieving a miscarriage or the loss of their fur baby or their pet, or even in this culture where people think you should be used to it by now. You work in a hospital. Like, what did you expect? Patients die. That lack of recognition can deepen the pain. So when we talk about grief in healthcare, it's not just one general thing. It's layered, it's personal, and it takes many shapes. The awareness here lets us name the different kinds of grief, and being exposed and aware, even loosely, it helps us recognize what's happening in ourselves and in our colleagues. This recognition opens the door to compassion. 3 days after Joey died, it was my annual PCP checkup. It was just on the calendar. I remember waking up and thinking, my child just died. Am I supposed to just wake up and go to my appointment? And guess what? I went. I felt, in retrospect, I felt like that was kind of crazy, but I was in so much shock and I was just on autopilot. I went because in my rawest days of grief, part of me felt that other healthcare providers would somehow be able to relate because in our training, seeing death is actually pretty common. And then I also think in retrospect, part of me wanted to speak as HCP to HCP because I needed to hear from someone. It's not your fault. I felt so much guilt inside. I showed up like an empty shell of a person. We talked about grief, and it was my first time hearing about the stages of grief. And I went home, I Googled 5 stages of grief. And because I didn't even know how to be, I clung to it like it was a roadmap that I was supposed to move through each stage and then I'd somehow be done grieving, right? Because all the bereavement leave we probably ever took, for grandparents, my uncle, it's 3 to 5 days and you're back to work. And as pharmacists, we like details, we like order, we like predictability, we like control, we like a process that makes sense. But grief does its own thing. It's on its own timeline, and grief stages actually look a lot more like this. Grief is messy, it's not linear, stages don't show up one after another, and many times they're just all blended together, or it cycles from one to another all within the same breath. Grief is as simple as sheer absence, but it's as complex as everything that absence touches. Child loss and bereavement is not rare. It's happening all around us, in our hospitals, in our clinics, in our schools, and in our communities. And here are some of the numbers. When looking at childhood bereavement, which is kids grieving and being impacted by loss, 6.4 million children will experience a sibling or a parent death by age 18. That's 1 in every dozen kids around us knowing a deep grief. When looking at pediatric deaths, the CDC reported in 2023 that there were 20,000 cases of infant mortality and 10,000 cases of pediatric deaths in kids aged 1 to 14. Losing a child is the worst pain a parent can ever endure, and it shows up in our health. Our body just knows. So when looking at parent mortality, a 2013 US study by Espinoza and colleagues did a 9-year follow-up of 69,000 mothers aged 20 to 50 from the National Longitudinal Mortality Survey, and it examined whether there was a heightened mortality risk for mothers after the death of a child. To not my surprise, bereaved mothers did have a higher risk of death, with a statistically significant hazard ratio of 2.3. The study reports that the risk is greatest during the first 2 years after child loss. And from my experience, I believe it because the apathy for living after is truly there. It's hard to choose to wake up every day after. A follow-up to that study in 2019 by Song and colleagues found that beyond the 9 years, even decades after child loss, bereaved parents, now looking at moms and dads, they have a 32% higher risk of early death. And the data on the cause of death show relatively high rates of death due to heart disease. Authors interpret this evidence as chronic stress from bereavement contributing to cardiovascular mortality through the physiological stress responses over time, such as inflammation, dysregulation, and autonomic changes. Grief impacts more than the mind. It lives in our bodies. When looking at complicated grief, which is grief that disrupts daily life or impairs function, 59% of parents still meet criteria 6 months after PICU loss. For me, I wasn't full-time at work until 9 months after Joey's accident. I was so lucky that my work team extended me so much grace and compassion through it all. And when the loss is sudden, like suicide, accidents, SIDS, the numbers climb even higher. At 18 months, depending on the child's cause of death, 78% of parents can still show high complicated grief symptoms. So these aren't abstract numbers. They're reminders that grief doesn't end when care ends or what we see on the inside. Families carry it with them for a lifetime. And as providers, we feel the impact too. This slide shows the impact grief has on providers. It's actually quite studied and totally validates that provider grief is real. It can show up as trauma or compassion fatigue or all of the above and more. There was a scoping review published in May of this year by Phillips and colleagues. It pulled together 81 studies across professional or provider grief in many healthcare settings. Most were qualitative and descriptive, but even the limited quantitative studies, the findings validate what we internalize and wonder when we're doing patient care. Am I the only one that feels this way or that? So for example, one study in that review found that 63% of nurses in a mixed acute setting, peds, maternity, surgical, oncology, reported experiencing grief after a patient death. And among those who said they didn't grieve, almost 89% admitted it was out of fear or optics of professionalism, not because they weren't impacted. That tells us how much silence and stigma surround provider grief. In a Canadian cross-sectional study by Plant and colleagues, they used a questionnaire and validated scoring system to measure grief after a memorable patient loss and found that for some providers, the grief they experienced after a child's death reached intensity compared to parents' grief early on. So this isn't minor secondary grief, it's actually very profound. And when it remains unprocessed, it accumulates. That's when we see burnout. That's when we see distancing, and that's when we see distress, and it shows up in our practice or at home. The society as a whole is just largely uncomfortable talking about grief, and this reflects in our work environments. So how do we care for our caregiver? What the data shows is helpful is listed on this slide. But keep in mind, grief and grieving will look different for everyone. So there's no one strategy that may work for someone or that may work for someone and not work for another. And while all of this looks great on paper, in my own lived experience as a provider, debriefs go by quickly, usually focused on what the team did right or well, or what can be improved. And it's more about the mind and a little less on how the heart feels. And I get it. It's hard to make time when you're on the clock. The next sick patient needs you. And we just haven't normalized grief conversations in general to speak about the heart. How does it feel after? The feelings. Talking about feelings in general is hard. So if you ask me, how do we care for our caregivers? After reviewing all of these pubs, I'd say to just be human. A true human, not a second guessing yourself, oh, what does the society want me to do? No, to just be a human. How do we do that? We validate the experience. We name it, we acknowledge it, we normalize grief conversations, and we talk about the feelings. It is okay to bring humanity into medicine. Before professionals, we are human first. I love therapy, and from my own experience after Joey, I would also vote for access to counseling. Another strategy listed here that stood out to me to mitigate provider grief is reflective practice, particularly narrative medicine. And to be honest, I've never heard of the term narrative medicine before this talk, but it's something we actually do already. Maybe we don't spend enough time, but this session is a version of that. So what is narrative medicine? It's using stories to create a shared understanding. So with that, I hope through my story, it gives you care in the form of gratitude. Having been on the other side, your side, and now on the patient side, I want to validate that your provider grief is real and that I see you, and I want to tell you you are doing a great job. Your work is hard work. When patients get better, we feel really good. And when patients don't get to leave the hospital, we carry it too. So before getting into that, I do want to recap. We touched on the mind aspect of grief with terminology, scientific findings, and numbers. But behind every statistic is a real person and family. My family, Joey, became a statistic. So here's a heart aspect of reflective practice. So a little bit about my professional background. I majored in dietetics, so I have a nutrition background. I pursued my PharmD at UCSF. After UCSF, I pursued a pediatric pharmacy residency, and I trained at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital. Worked there for a little bit, moved across the country, served at Boston Children's Hospital. I was their main NICU pharmacist, cross-covering PICU and CVICU. And of course, working in a hospital setting as a pharmacist, you really cross-cover all areas. After Boston Children's Hospital, I moved back to California and I practiced at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland. As you know, level 1 trauma. And so that's my professional background. But I want to give you a little bit more of a glimpse of me just from my perspective. So like many of you, I spent late nights pictured here in the top left at school, sometimes cramming and sometimes just hoping that falling asleep on my notes would help me absorb the material faster. Then there's the joy of graduation and then excitement with co-residents to be finally done with residency. We only had 1 year, and I understand that many of you have many more years beyond that, but I was very glad to be done with residency. I was ready to find my niche and practice at the top of my license. And like many of you, I worked crazy hours every other weekend, flipping between days and nights through the holidays, stressed over finding switches, and poured myself into research and patient care, all driven by the same purpose, to serve the most vulnerable patients. And of course, there's home life. I have always wanted to be a mother. I've just always really liked the idea of raising little humans and seeing what my guidance can help them achieve. But of course, the road to motherhood wasn't easy. And I feel like that has to do with me being in healthcare. For some reason, healthcare people just see other healthcare things. Like, I don't know what it is. But anyways, we had back-to-back miscarriages, which was major disenfranchised grief before I even had a name for it. And then IVF, and that's a journey in itself. So if you know, you know. Our first son was born on 2018. Our second son was born in 2020. And then on December 28th, 2021, our growing family was complete. Our third born son, Joey Tate Kim, was born here at John Muir. And something about him was always different, and I couldn't put into words what it was. He exuded so much calm, so much joy, and just so much wisdom, just for being even a baby. Like, I didn't even know a baby can exude these things. He did this through the little twinkle in his eyes or a gaze that made me feel so loved for all that I was, flaws and all. He somehow made me feel like I was enough. I remember saying to my husband when Joey was still alive, man, I feel like the way Joey looks at me, it's like he loves me more than you love me. He was my little sanctuary. He's the light of my life for sure. So I'm going to try to play a little video to share with you a little glimpse of Joey. So hopefully the sound works. Can I get a thumbs up when you do hear it? I'm going to press play now.
Oh, this is your first love. Good morning. Yes, mommy, good morning. Happy 100th day. I love you. Yeah. Can you laugh? I love you.
Whenever I watch these videos of him, I can't believe he was here, and then he is not. 3 years feels so long ago and just like yesterday, all at the same time. The last parts of the clip with him laughing, I remember showing that to the PICU nurses and the PICU team when we were in the PICU. So thank you so much for letting me share that. And then on day of life 199, Joey became your patient. 6-month-old full-term baby boy, previously healthy, found unresponsive in his room. He arrived at John Muir ED with ongoing CPR. Patient received 2 doses of IO, epi, and route. Intubation completed, received 3 additional doses of epi, and noted to have return of spontaneous circulation. Longest estimated downtime, which was when he was last seen playing, to ROSC, 57 minutes. From my point of view, on Friday, July 15, 2022, it was a regular day. Everybody was home. By everybody, I mean the older brothers, my husband, my mom, and dad. It was a full house. Everybody was home. It wasn't even like I was by myself with 3 kids. Everybody was home. I was 3 weeks into onboarding a new job, and I just finished picking up the older boys from school with my husband, and my parents were taking care of Joey. As soon as I got home, I retrieved him, I nursed him, I chatted with him, took some selfies together, and then I placed him in his usual playpen awake with the usual playthings that all of my children have played with before. I stepped away for about 15 minutes to eat, noticed it was unusually quiet, and went to check on him. I found him motionless, supine, with an object circled here, covering his mouth and nose. After all I've seen in the PICU, the ED, how could I have missed this as a risk? How could I have seen the rarest of the rare things at work and still miss this? I thought that I was beyond hypervigilant enough, and my husband would agree, like I was pretty hypervigilant. And this picture was a picture that was taken 3 days before the accident. I think someone is off mute, if we can go on mute.
Yeah, I can't see who it is.
Okay. And just like that, everything changed in an instant. I screamed for my husband as I pulled the object off his face. I frantically tried to wake him. My husband took him and started CPR, and he shouted, "Call 911," just like in PALS. The police arrived and took over CPR and set up the AED. Not shockable rhythm. And then I immediately shouted, "Back on the chest," just like in PALS. Muscle memory is real. The fire department and EMS showed up shortly after. CPR continued out of the house into the ambulance, walking right by my 2 living boys and Joey's grandparents. When we arrived to the ED, the whole team was ready for us. The first person I saw when I entered the room was actually my friend, who was the peds pharmacist. We actually knew each other in high school, and we both trained at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford. I shouted, "Sadie, that's my baby." And the look in her eyes was just filled with sadness. It was watery. It was every emotion I felt before when I used to see families pop through the door. And now here she was prepping my son's epidoses and all the other meds. Can you imagine seeing your friend in such an awful circumstances? I mean, I know we love our jobs, but we never want to see our friend or anyone we know at our place of work. It was traumatic. I felt it for both of us. At the same time, seeing a familiar face in an awful time comforted me. I knew Joey was in good hands. She's peds trained, like me. Everything felt like a nightmare. I didn't want this to be real. It was an out-of-body experience when I felt like I was at work but not. And then I heard someone ask for a time check. I heard the whole 4 to 5 rounds of epi summary, and then it became all muffled and distorted. It kind of just felt like blah, blah, blah after. And that's when I broke down. I knew so much of life or death in a situation like this was up to the care team. They have now shown my family, me and my husband, that they were doing all that they can. And I was scared that they were going to call it after that. I turned into my husband and I said, "No, this can't be. This can't be. He needs to come back. He needs to come back." Looking back on medical records, we hit the door around 6:19 p.m. and ROSC was achieved at 6:27 p.m. 8 minutes. But his max estimated downtime was 57 minutes. And trust me, every fiber of my body knew what that meant. The mom side of me, desperate for a miracle, in spite of what my clinical experiences have shown me, my heart was fighting my mind. When the MRI came back showing global devastation, we asked if Joey would be a candidate for organ donation. In my years of practicing in the hospital, whether it be in adults or pediatrics, I knew there was always someone waiting for an organ, a second chance at life, a gift of hopefully more time. In my mind, if we couldn't have our miracle for Joey to come back, I can only hope Joey serves as a miracle for someone else. Joey's last act of service was the gift of life. And I'm going to play his honor walk here.
Everything that's dead and gone. I don't wanna say goodbye, 'cause this one means forever. Now you're in the stars, the 6 feet never felt so far. Here I am alone between the heavens and the embers. Oh, it hurts so hard. For a million different reasons, you took the best of my heart. Left the rest in pieces.
I am so grateful the staff captured this memory for us, and I love it. I watch it over and over again. It's a weird thing to love, right? But this is one of the last moments we've had with Joey, and why I appreciate having this so much is because I see all the people that showed up for Joey. That is the quiet power of presence. And I actually recognize, Dr. Grelly, who ended up taking care of Joey's twin sisters in the NICU, Julie, our NICU nurse, and of course, Chris, and so many others that showed up for us on a summer Saturday afternoon when they can be doing something else. But instead, they chose to spend moments with us to carry us in this time of need, to help us shoulder some of the grief. And every time I watch it, like I said, I love it because I see the quiet power of presence. I am so grateful you gave my family some of your precious time. And time is a currency where none of us know the balance of. And in that moment, you chose to be present with us in our darkest time. And I don't forget that. Sometimes in medicine, we wonder if what we do really matters, if our roles within the healthcare system matters. And I'm here to say, yes, it does. I remember the quiet acknowledgement checking in at the front desk or being buzzed into the PICU, and the likely behind the scenes powwow of how to best support my family. I remember the continuity of care, seeing the same people show up each day to care for my family. They were all doing their job, but to me, how they did it felt like we really mattered. I appreciate the words of hope when we needed it. I appreciated all the consult services coming to the PICU to really show us that they were evaluating all the things. I appreciated Child Life helping us with legacy art, the nurses with their thoughtful gesture of just giving Joey cute blankets so it feels a little less sterile in there. I appreciate the makeshift hotel room in the ante room next to Joey so we can spend what little time we would have left with him. I appreciated everyone who showed up to his honor walk. And after Joey died, whenever we reached out to our pediatrician, my PCP, my OBGYN, everyone validated our pain and kept their door open and continued to remind us anything we need, we can go to them for support. And I felt it in their words and in their watery eyes. And then when Joey's twin sisters were born, we felt so cared for in the NICU. We were discharged from mother baby unit with Camellia, but she wasn't feeding well, and we brought her to the ED. And I remember the NICU charge nurse, Linda. She helped expedite her admission. And I so appreciated her saying, I was at Joey's honor walk. You guys have suffered enough. I broke down in gratitude because I couldn't believe after all this time, someone who barely knew my family remembered Joey and is now helping us in another critical time point. And then the NICU attendings and the nurses being so patient with us. We were traumatized. I was so scared to take the twins home. Not because two babies are hard, but because I felt like they were safer with 24/7 pulse ox on them. The trauma is real. In a time when I doubted my ability to keep our kids alive, the NICU team acknowledged the grief and trauma and helped us build the confidence that the twins were physically ready and thriving. I remember John Muir very fondly, showing up as professionals, but more importantly, as human beings. Even though Joey's story didn't have the outcome we prayed for me, John Muir still feels like home. In the quiet power of presence, families remember most the compassion, and I hope you can hold on to that. Now here's a little glimpse of life after, because we know what happens all the way up till discharge, but we never get the insight of how are they doing after. And I wondered this for myself when I saw memorable patient cases. So I hope I can bring this to you as a sort of closed loop or a sort of closure, if you will. So life after discharge, the reality set in. We don't get to bring Joey home. I was so sad. I felt a huge hole in my heart that my heart physically hurt. And yet in the same car ride, grief and joy collided. Joey had died, and someone got the call that they matched for an organ. Our hearts were shattered, time stood still, and yet the world kept spinning. Now we had to go home and tell his brothers that Joey's body stopped working, Joey died, he's not coming home. And if it weren't for my living kids, I've said this to my therapist, my husband, my closest friends, that surviving felt impossible. The apathy for life and the will to live, it's real and it was questionable. So when people ask, how are you doing? I didn't have the words. And then I came across this image of functioning. And I was like, this is me. It felt truthful, neutral, because I am functioning, but all shattered, barely holding it together, yet functioning. So even to this day, when I am smiling, being professional for work, having fun with the kids, planning anything, this is what functioning feels like for me. Still broken, still showing up, just doing my best. While I was figuring out how to do grief for myself, I quickly learned that children grieve too. Sibling bonds are so deep. Archie was only 2 years and 3 months old when Joey died. To him, Joey was his baby. They spent all 6 months together. Archie saw himself as Joey's big brother, protector, even a parent in his own little way. I love how Joey is so open with his grief, even without knowing the term grief. He asks so many questions. He pretends to play with baby Joey. He draws these cute little butterflies and angels, and he looks to the sky with such wonder. I actually spoke with him this morning before the call, and I said, "Oh, mommy's doing a presentation. I'm so nervous." He was like, "What are you presenting on, mommy?" And I was like, "I'm going to talk about grief and how we miss people." And then he said, "Are you going to talk about baby Joey?" And I said, "Yes." And he was so happy and so smiling because he loves hearing it too. The center photo is of Archie during a grief wave. It was in June of our first year into grief with Joey. Joey's anniversary is July. So in June, and this actually happens every time around June, his body somehow knows, he would just feel out of sorts and he would cry. I'd help him name the feeling. I'd say, "Hey, when you miss Joey, you can hug this stuffy." And he'd say, "I don't want to hug this stuffy. I want to hug real baby Joey." They may not always be able to name the grief, but they feel every ounce of it. And parenting after loss is hard. I barely have myself together, and just when I think I do, my little grievers need me. Like you just don't catch a break. You just keep going. 6 months after losing Joey, I remember talking to Archie and asking him, "Who is big brother? Who's little brother?" He said, "Maxwell is big brother. I'm little brother." And I said to Archie, "Wait a minute. You're also big brother too. You're a big brother to baby Joey." And the look he had on his face was like he forgot. The fear after child loss is a fear that they will be forgotten, and I could not handle that. I was willing to accept that the rest of the world will eventually forget about Joey, and I could live with that. But I could not accept that anyone in our own family would forget about him. I started to look for grief books that Archie could relate to, that resonated, that connected, that wasn't abstract. And I wanted to find something that can build connection, offer memory, but also guide conversation on how our angels show up in magical ways. I didn't want this to be grief that was viewed as something to hide or we're not allowed to feel. I wanted Archie to grow up to know that we are allowed to carry the grief and love forward. When I couldn't find one, I decided to create one. I knew I couldn't be the only one struggling to parent after loss. So I wanted to make a book that could be customized. So when I started on this passion project, my definition of success was if it could just help one other family, then the effort would be worth it. I met many lost moms on social media. I learned of so many angel stories and relationships. I wanted to create a book that can honor and include as many family experiences as possible. A book that could speak to parents with or without living children, because I understand that not everyone after loss is lucky to have living children to look forward to. I wanted it to speak to grandparents or aunties and uncles. I wanted it to speak to friends of the family, or friends of the angels themselves, whether it be school friends, classroom friends, or just playground friends. I wanted a book that can speak to siblings who met their angel and even siblings who came after loss so they can remember that this person was part of their family even though that they didn't get to meet. So because child loss ripples across the community, I felt that this was important and this was a gap that was missing. Look to the Sky is the book. It reads as a message from the angel, gently guiding and reminding grievers and friends to stay open to the signs they send, and that even in physical absence, love lives on. It's both a keepsake and a resource, and my hope is that it helps normalize grief conversations while also serving as a gesture friends can turn to when there are no words that bring comfort, regardless of how much time has passed. I remember friends desperately trying to show up for us and they had no idea what to do. And so this was also created with them in mind that this is something that they can turn to help in their quest to find support for their grievers. So here's a brief how-to video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Here you can personalize your angel. You can add the dedication here, or there's one pre-built for you. You can choose to customize this page on who created it. You can choose special memories here on what resonates with you and what the friends did together. Choose special dates, whether it's a birthday or a special vacation that you went on together, or simply just the angel's date. They can see their silhouettes, so in a way this represents all of them being together again. Here you can add a special photo. And here's another area that you can put a shared memory. Or just leave it as is with just the soft photos in the book.
So you can customize the angel's appearance as you've seen. You can select different scene selections, and it changes different pages, and there's a version for the parents or more of the adult readers, and then there's a version for more of the children readers. I took into account what could be triggering for some and not others. And what's really special about this book, it includes the angel's name, which is woven into the illustrations of the story, almost like a little peekaboo hello for the reader, to show that, you know, your angel does show up in magical ways, whether it's seeing the different butterflies or certain birds. This book serves as a warm hug to whoever is experiencing this book. And I'm going to show this next part here. Okay. So I was given permission to share these impact stories with you. Here are some families who have brought this book into their homes. On the left is Jason, born still 23 years ago. And I just think about, after all this time, finally, a resource and a keepsake that boldly honors his memory that the parents can have in their home for their living children or for themselves. At the center is Mason. He's the oldest of 4 boys who fought cancer all the way through with the biggest smile and brightest light. Mason's mom, Leslie, just posted this yesterday, and I didn't even have the slide before, but I thought about, it makes sense to show some of the people that it's impacted so far. And the message that she posted reads, "Love this personalized book from Grievers and Friends. I wish it didn't have to exist, but it's a beautiful way to talk about Mason and the feelings we are experiencing." And on the right is vibrant, full of life Olivia, who died 3 days after her leukemia diagnosis 3 years ago. Her parents have since created the Olivia Chan Foundation, a nonprofit aiming to create a community space to walk individuals through grief until they can rediscover little moments of joy. Stories like this are part of the why behind Grievers and Friends, and specifically to the creation of Look to the Sky. I always think about the care and compassion and grace that surrounded me, the people who showed up quietly without needing to fix anything, and who reminded me that I wasn't alone. It's hard to measure the outcome of kindness, but it kept me living another day and another day and another day. And I couldn't be here today to share what I created if it wasn't for the cumulative effect of kindness and compassion. That is the quiet power of presence. This is the ripple effect of your compassion. So you've seen how much presence and compassion matter, but we also know that when someone is grieving, it's hard to know what to say or do. My next section is about grief support. So one of the most helpful frameworks I've come across for understanding how to support someone in grief is called the ring theory. It is applicable to grief and also for just anyone in crisis. I like this because it's simple to remember. So let's focus on this image here and pick a scenario you've experienced. Imagine grief as a series of concentric circles. At the very center is a person most directly impacted. In our case with Joey, it would be the parents. In the next rings are siblings, close friends, family, and as the circles expand, you get the wider community, colleagues, and so on. And the rule is simple: comfort in, dump out. If you're in the outer ring, your role is to offer support inward. Comfort flows toward the center. What doesn't flow toward the center are your fears, your frustrations, and your needs. Your fears, frustrations, and needs are all still valid. And of course, you're allowed to seek support and feel those things, but it should really move outward to someone in your own support network or further out. So when in doubt, comfort in and dump out. When supporting someone, the words we choose can either isolate or support. They can feel heavy or lighten the load. So here are some common phrases that could land the wrong way despite good intentions and how we can reframe them into something more supportive. Notice just how small shifts in language can change the whole impact. Some of my favorite check-ins were simply, I am thinking of you. I saw a butterfly today and I thought of Joey and you. Here for you. No need to respond. No need to respond is the best thing to hear when you're carrying this weight. Because I'm sure there's a little bit of people pleasing in all of us. So when we get these messages, we feel like we have to say something right away. So just including no need to respond is very helpful. Being mindful of words include being mindful in the kinds of questions we ask too. Many of us default to questions that unintentionally add weight. For me, how are you is just too big of a question to answer. We say it all the time and many times not expecting a loaded answer. So depending on the relationship with the person, I preferred when someone asked me more specific things like, how was drop off this morning? How have the last couple of hours been for you? And then, of course, after child loss, the question that is still really hard to answer and is so innocent most of the time is variations of, do you have more kids? It's a battle between being honest to include all of my children, earth or in heaven, or the guilt of omitting the child in heaven to spare them the discomfort. So this is about swapping the automatic loaded questions for ones that invite openness without pressure. Again, the point here is not perfection. As I said before, we are all learning as we go. The point here is awareness. The awareness gives us the chance to pause, to notice, and to choose words or actions that lighten the weight instead of adding to it. So again, showing up imperfectly is better than not showing up at all. Beyond words and questions, the most powerful support often comes through presence in the small, everyday ways that we show up. Grief doesn't end after the first year, but the support typically fades over time, especially because your griever may look fine, I may look fine. For example, I amaze myself when I perform like a normal person. Like for those who don't know me and see me on the outside, I bet they could never imagine the weight that I'm carrying. So the greatest gift you can give is to just keep showing up, even years later. And it could be as simple as a text message or words of affirmation that they are doing great. We need it. Like I need it. So thank you when you tell me these things, like thank you. Because however we are functioning, it's just more support and more support that is needed because it's so much effort to even function. Don't worry about if you're reaching out to someone too late or too soon. The act of acknowledging a loss and showing empathy is kindness whenever you do it. A little bit more of griefy wisdom here for your awareness. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. It also extends to child loss of any age for anyone gone too soon. So if you know someone who is experiencing this type of loss or has experienced it, reach out to them during this month and it shows that you're with them in this lifelong grief journey. Your awareness and action is the quiet power of presence. And this time of year is also an extra griefy season. As a grieving mom, I am reminded of all the memories I wish I could have with Joey for Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. While many think of this season as an exciting time of year, many also feel that this season is the heaviest time of year, not to mention the shorter days and just the dark, gloomy weather. Grief looks different for everyone. There's no right or wrong way to do grief. For me, the next fear after losing a child is the fear that they will be forgotten. So I carry a plush kangaroo of Joey with me. I don't know if you can see it here. I take family photos with this plush and his picture, and I will probably celebrate his birthday for the rest of my life. I love this image. It is so true. Society expects grief to disappear with time, but it actually evolves and continues, just in a different form, or it cycles back and forth. And I truly believe that grief is a forever thing because love is a forever thing. And knowing how grief can be forever, I think about how it's so important to be kind because everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. So next I have a summary slide, which will be followed by knowledge check questions, and then we will close with a short video. So in closing, grief is a universal experience. It is complex and lifelong. Presence matter more than perfection. And what families remember most is compassion. So when in doubt, think about the ring theory, comfort in, dump out, and normalize conversations about grief. Say their name, share a memory, and trust that there really is a quiet power to presence. At the end of the day, so many of us are just walking around functioning but brokenhearted. So choose kindness and give grace when you can, especially to yourself. And as we switch into the knowledge check, I want to leave you with this thought. Shared joy is double the joy, and shared sorrow is half a sorrow. And with that, I have 4 knowledge check questions tied to the CME MOC credits that cover the key takeaways. Please comment in the chat with your answer, or feel free to come off of mute and say your answer. When I get a few responses, I will move on to the next question. Question 1, provider grief can negatively impact which of the following? A, clinician well-being, B, communication with patients and families, C, quality of patient care, D, all of the above.
D.
Love it. Perfect. That is the right answer. D. Okay. Question 2. Which phrase best reflects grief literacy and communication? A. At least they are no longer suffering. B. Tell me about your loved one. C. You need to move on for your health. D. Everything happens for a reason. This is a little bit tricky, I feel like.
B.
Yes, B. That's the correct answer. And here's question 3. Compassionate communication with grieving families includes A, using the patient's or loved one's name when speaking, B, validating emotions without trying to fix them, C, being present even in silence, or D, all of the above.
D.
D.
You guys are acing it. Okay, question 4. According to the ring theory, which direction should comfort flow? A, inward toward the center of grief, B, outward away from the center of grief, C, both inward and outward equally, D, comforting direction does not matter.
A.
Yes, comfort in, dump out. And finally, I will leave you with this video. Your quiet power of presence, your empathy, compassion, and grace gave me the strength and space to survive what felt impossible. I never thought I could be here today, exactly 3 years from when I announced to the world that Joey had died, and being full circle back to share my experience, my story, and my findings so that we can all be more compassionate together. So please allow me to play this last video.
And I rise like the day, I rise up, I rise unafraid, I rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. And I rise up, I like the waves, I rise up, in spite of the ache, I rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again.
Thank you so much for your time. I have so much gratitude to everyone who jumped on this call today. Here's a slide of just resources for anyone navigating crisis or grief. And with that, here are my acknowledgements. Thank you, Dr. Horsano and the team for not giving up in the ED, and to the PICU team for just such exceptional care, compassion, and grace you gave my family during those 8 extra days with Joey. Thank you for everyone that showed up for Joey's honor walk, and to the NICU team for caring for Joey's twin sisters. And we know without the Department of Pediatrics here at John Muir, we would have had a very different grief journey. So with endless gratitude, thank you for your time and for allowing me to share what Joey taught me. This is how you can get in touch. Thank you so much.
So I would like to say thank you, Jenny, for sharing a profound story and invaluable insights for us today. And then as a pediatric critical care physician who was privileged to be part of Joey's care, I'm deeply grateful for how you have transformed your family griefs into a living legacy of compassion, reflections, and purpose. You have given us more than knowledge today. You've given us a gift that reminds us that our presence, compassion, and humanity can transcend outcomes. It's a gift we hope to share with every family we serve, especially those navigating loss, so they too may find that grief and joy can coexist. Your story renews our sense of purpose as clinicians, to show up with empathy, to hold space with dignity, and to remember that what we offer extends beyond medicine. Thank you for letting us be part of Joey's story and for helping us keep that light alive. On behalf of all of us, thank you for helping us see that love truly lives on. Thank you.
Thank you.